So we're going to get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to xTalk's Digital Discourses. My name is Molly Ruggles. It's great to see you all here. We are thrilled today to have with us Laura Chernowitz from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Professor Chernowitz is the director of the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, and she'll be talking with us today about trends in education and technology in higher education from an inequality and inclusivity perspective. A few words before we begin. Please help yourself to snacks. Please help us keep the room tidy. Please sign in on the clipboard going around so we can build community. And if you'd like to be in the xTalk's mailing list, make sure to get your name on the clipboard and we will add you. This afternoon's double feature, starting with Laura at 2:30 and then also another presentation at 4, it's our last set of xTalks for this season. But we're already planning some really interesting events for next fall, so make sure you're on the list to stay informed. Today's format will be, Laura will present for 40 or 45 minutes, and then there'll be time for Q&A. So without further ado, would you please give me a very, very warm welcome to Laura Chernowitz.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. Thanks very much for being here. I know it's the end of the semester and everyone's very busy. This came out of a discussion last year. I was on a panel with Vijay over there and talking about issues to do with equity and inequality, and he suggested that this would be of interest to you, so I hope it is. I changed the title slightly because I realized I couldn't cover all the trends in educational technology, so I'm going to be focused on going online in higher education. I'm going to make some preliminary remarks about the changing landscape, and then talk about equality and inequality as a framework, and then look at some of the key issues and implications through that framework. So I will assume that people are familiar with the format of the curriculum landscape. And this has really been the traditional space that we are most familiar with. We have the curriculum integration axis, the formal credit-bearing courses, the semi-formal short courses, which have been going for many years, and the non-formal kind of summer school type of activities, those kind of talks. That's the format that has been in universities for decades. What we've seen in the formal space is a move increasingly to the blended space, and of course, to online spaces. So a lot of the discussion has been what's happening in the formal spaces and particularly with online courses. And then, of course, there was that year of 2012, the year of the MOOC. The interesting thing about the MOOC was it's really in that semi-formal, non-formal space, which provided an enormous number of opportunities for innovation, because one was not constricted by all of the regulatory requirements of that formal area. And after the MOOCs arrived, and there was a great belief that the MOOCs were not really the thing after all, MOOCs haven't actually gone away. What's particularly interesting at the moment, I think, is what's going on in that MOOC variant space, and I think that's definitely what's not going to go away. So that's the kind of context very briefly. At the same time as all of this has been going on, we have the disaggregation of teaching and learning. And we could spend the whole talk just looking at this slide. Let's just take it as a given that we are used to a concept that's a complete package for everything. The students pay fees, and the content, support, assessment, certification, quality assurance, and platform is coherent. Of course, what we're seeing now in these emergent models is that every single part is separate. And we could name a company next to every single one of these dimensions. And that creates an enormous amount of fragmentation, possibly incoherence, and is probably one of the most profound reasons that the landscape is shifting so much. At the same time, in this landscape, we're seeing an enormous diversity of players. So we used to imagine that it was us in universities who provided education. Now we have telecommunications companies providing education. We have those things we thought were publishers providing education. And we have an enormous ecosystem of different types of players, which obviously changes the landscape. And in this very, very complicated landscape, there is online learning. And it's clearly very much and recognized to be the issue of the moment. So the Horizon report, for those of you who are familiar with higher education, as far as the Horizon report is concerned, this is a short-term trend, the increased use of blended learning. It's with us. But even those outside of education recognize this. So The Economist recognizes this as the new frontier. I love the language. And Forbes, too, recognizes online, blended, and flipped learning as the issue of the moment. Online learning is undoubtedly growing. Until recently, online education was provided largely by private providers. That's shifting. And it was certainly not provided by traditional universities such as this one. That's profoundly shifting too. We're seeing elite universities who were not in that space, who prided themselves on face-to-face in the online space. And we're also seeing MOOCs being taken up by a range of providers with a lot of different agendas all over the place. And of course, the interesting thing from an equality point of view is that online education has a global orientation in a way that face-to-face can't really have. Despite all of the internationalization, the moving of markets and so on, online simply by its nature and its affordances has global possibilities. And actually, all higher education is digitally mediated. We actually have to rethink this notion of online and traditional. I think that's kind of over. What we have now is different ways of thinking about learning and about education. And I thought this was quite a simple and useful thing, which is to think about independent study and guided and supported learning instead. Because there isn't any learning that happens that's not digitally mediated in one way or another. So that's the kind of basis for the world that we're working in. But at the same time, we're having to consider equality and inequality. And here I'm using a sociologist called Thurborn, who doesn't write in the education arena particularly, but I have found his framework particularly helpful. And you can imagine there's a lot of discussion about what does equality mean. So I'm going for Thurborn's definition, the capability to function fully as a human being. Very simple, it draws on Sen very largely. And I think he reminds us, and importantly, that this is actually an issue of justice and morality. And that inequalities are produced by systems and through distributive action by individuals and collectively. And that you have to pay attention to both the individual and the collective dimensions. In the higher education space, what's particularly important is that you have to consider both inequality of input or opportunity, which is where the focus is tended to be, as well as outcome. And you have to think of a number of different dimensions. It's nothing new. I think you're all familiar with Are Created Equal. It was written in 1776. So. But it's a of the world that we live in. It's a foundational assumption. And certainly in the South African Constitution, which is where I come from, the preamble for the Constitution starts with the values of human dignity, the achievement of equality, as the basis for everything which follows. I couldn't find the word equality in the MIT mission. But I did find the statement that everyone that each member, we seek to develop each member of the community the ability and passion to work wisely, creatively, and really effectively for the betterment of mankind, which I will take as a proxy for a commitment to equality. But as we're familiar, widening inequality is a major problem in the world today. As the World Economic Forum points out, they listed as the number 2 concern, widening income disparities throughout the world. And they point out that increasing inequality is the number 1 problem, the number 1 challenge in the US today. There are a number of ways of measuring inequality. I like the Palmer ratio because it measures the ratio of the richest 10% of the population's share of gross national income divided by the poorest 40%. It's a nice kind of easy thing to measure compared to other forms of measurement. And the red is the more unequal, and the dark blue is the more equal. So South Africa's pretty terrible. We seem to vie with Brazil for being the most unequal country in the world. It's not something one wants to be vying with anyone for. The US is not in the category of the more equal countries. And if you look at the US in relation to the OECD countries, there are a number of others which are much more equal. You would expect the Scandinavian countries, but perhaps you wouldn't expect some of the others to be more equal than the US. And only Turkey, Mexico, and Chile being more unequal. So when I was asked to give this talk, I thought I didn't actually only want to talk about South Africa and sub-Saharan Africa as if this was only a global South, global North issue. It's actually an issue within countries as well. Just to add to the mix of all of these concerns about growing inequality, there is the issue of internet access. And it's interesting that the UN, and it's actually the Human Rights Council of the UN, describes universal access to the internet as a priority. And certainly, I mean, this popped up just the other day. Digital access, this is the mayor of Johannesburg speaking last week, says that this is as much an equity issue as access to water and electricity. But those of you who work in educational technology will be aware of some of these reports. The Horizon report I've already mentioned. This is a recent International Council for Open and Distance Education report. This is where Vijay and I met recently. And this has just come out, the Preparing for the Digital University. The Avalanche is coming. I know it's 2 years old, but it's really the report that is often seen to be the one that set off so much of the excitement and drama around online and MOOCs, and certainly was the one that got all the vice chancellors very anxious. The word inequality and equality doesn't appear, nor does equity or inequity. The word access does appear, but it appears in a particular kind of way, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So if we think about the society that we live in, there's 2 ways of thinking about this. There's 2 imaginaries. The one is market-led, and the other one is commons-led, really. And what there is disagreement about which policies and strategies are most likely to facilitate progress to more equitable society. I think the jury's, it's out on this. Certainly, the educational technology companies are investing dramatically. 1.87 billion in the year 2014 in investment in educational technology. And interestingly, from the point of view of where I'm located, over 50% of that investment has been outside the US. So this has got to do with some sort of notion of the global marketplace, opportunities for profits, presumably. I don't know how many of these are driven by an imaginary of a more equal world or more equal countries. On the other hand, the Cape Town Open Education Declaration, which is one of the many declarations about openness, epitomizes a very different perspective. And it's one where every person in the world can both access and contribute to all human knowledge. And I'm going to come back to that because this notion of access and contribution is one of the ways I think that the discussions to date have been somewhat one-sided. How one addresses these issues? Well, a recent Oxfam report points out that government spend on education is dramatically dropping and argues that governments need to take back ownership of public policy and that they should be spending at least 20% of their government budgets every year on education. And in my part of the world, where issues of transformation have been absolutely dominant of late, it's pointed out that transformation of universities can't happen without recapitalizing the universities. So I'm going to end each section by asking a question, because these are really complex, convoluted, difficult issues. How can a values-led hybrid ecology of digitally mediated educational provision be shaped that strikes a strategic balance between state support and private sector provision to prioritize and enable equality in higher education? Now I'm going to talk about some of the kinds of inequality, and this is where I found Thurborn so very helpful. Thurborn's got a very complex framework. This is just one aspect of it. Talks about vital inequality, resource inequality, and existential inequality. And I'm going to use those as a framework for my next points, just bearing in mind that these exist through all levels of the system, the micro, the meso, and the macro, and within and across regions and countries. Vital inequality, he says, this is about people as organisms. This is life or death issues, and one might say, well, that's for health, that's not for education. But there's a lot of research that shows the links between life chances and education. So first of all, poor people are less likely to be educated. Educated people live longer. And interestingly, I read the other day that parents of college graduates live longer. And if you read the poverty and inequality literature, you'll see that educational deprivation is an important indicator in the new indicators which are moving away from the very narrow incomes-based indicators to more complex social issues. And educational deprivation is included there. So really this landscape that I sketched very broadly in a very broad brushstroke way at the beginning has got to be considering these issues of inequality and equality. And certainly in the early days, they did. So we've heard that MOOCs have a capacity for the incredible democratization of education, and that the budding revolution in global online education, there's nothing that has more potential to lift people out of poverty. These kinds of comments can be criticized for being grand claims. And they should be criticized for anything that suggests that they are promises. But I think it's a worry when the fundamental foundations and values implicit in them fall away entirely. And I fear that that's what's happened as we've come to understand in more detail who MOOC students really are. And those of you working in the MOOC space will be very familiar with the fact that they're predominantly highly educated, they're largely employed, many more men than women. The figures vary, and I think it depends on countries and courses and so on, but up to 80 or 90% sometimes. They are more educated than the general population. And if you look at the studies of BRICS countries and developing countries, much more educated than the general population. They are largely from developed countries, and those from developing countries tend to be older. So those young people who need access to education are not being served presently. And we're also starting to get some really interesting data about online learners. I think this particular study is interesting because they managed to survey 40,000 online students in almost 500,000 courses. Fantastic. I did not know that. I have a lot of questions. And what this particular study showed is that those who struggled more than others to adapt were males, interestingly, younger students, black students, and students with lower grade point averages. So this makes it a little bit more of a difficult situation. In my part of the world, a colleague based in Kenya says most universities and most academics in Africa don't have the luxury to invest in time and resources in anything just because it's a good thing to do. It needs to solve a problem. So I'm arguing that we need to bring the discussion back to how can this new landscape serve the needs of the disadvantaged and enable social inclusion. I hope this is something that we'll be able to talk about. We do need to grow the small body of research, and there is some excellent research. A few examples here. The slides will be made available afterwards, so you can hopefully follow up some of these excellent examples of research, but it's not a lot. There's no end, and there's a lot of research coming out about online and MOOCs, and this is just a small amount that touches on the kinds of issues I've been raising. We need more, and we also need to draw policy attention to the possibilities of the social possibilities of the new landscape, not just the commercial possibilities. So I'm ending this section by asking which forms of blended and online education can best serve the social and economic interests of developing countries and of the disadvantaged in unequal countries. Resource inequality is where most of the focus tends to be. I think it makes people feel that there's something you can do. You can provide resources and everything will get better. But sadly, as we were saying earlier, if you build it, they won't necessarily come. It's not just the thing. And I'm using resources in the broader sense, in the Bourdieu sense of the word. Bourdieu talks about different forms of capital, economic capital, cultural capital, and he includes institutional capital there, embodied capital, social capital. And inevitably, if you're talking about resources, you're talking about contestations over power. Who has access to resources? Which configurations of resources? The most obvious one, the one that people, I think, tend to forget about, is electricity. It was ironic when we were having our conference call the other day with VJ. We had a power outage in the middle of the call. That was the end of my part of the conversation. I felt like it happened to make a point.
It was well made, wasn't it?
VJ said, "Where were you?" And I think we do have to remember that internet access is still the exception, not the rule. So the percentage of the population who use the internet once a year globally is not even half yet. Location is still key. In North America, 84% of the population is connected. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's 13%. And income is still key. Even within the US, the difference of connectivity by income is marked. Of course, the thing that is exciting all of us is the rise of mobiles throughout the world. And it is an incredibly exciting and dramatic trend that is happening. So the colors are not very clear, but these are the mobile subscriptions compared to the broadband subscriptions. Quite dramatic. But the problem is it's not about the device, it's about the data. And if you're looking at data, you have to look at affordability. So this particular report says that affordability is 5% of monthly income, and that there are 3 levels: entry level, maturing, and connected. Connected is really what you need to do a MOOC. In sub-Saharan Africa, 53% could afford access of entry level. So that's enough for SMS. And the graphs make a similar point. If you look at full connectivity and the difference between developed and developing countries, in terms of affordability, it's dramatic. And I haven't included graphs on speed because that makes for an even more depressing account. In addition, there are different purposes for using the internet. So in developing countries, improving earning power and access to education are major drivers. This is not for interest. This is not for browsing. Those of us in higher education are serving more diverse student populations than ever before, with a greater diversity of delivery models and a highly differentiated resource pool of cultural capital. With the rise of flexible education comes the fact that universities are not set up for flexible education, for part-time students, for non-traditional education at all. And there's a huge amount of literature that makes this point. If we're thinking about student literacies, to go back to the original representation, the version of student literacies that supports the online space is one that is confident, self-directed, capable, and so on. And that, of course, is a particular elite version of student literacies. What research is actually showing us is how varied and variated student literacies are. So they're highly differentiated. They're much shallower than we think. This is based on a lot of work done in the UK. There are many contradictions in this notion, this myth of the digital native. Knowledge creation is a minority. And many of the educators are the ones who actually introduce the activities, not the students. And certainly the literature reviews of MOOCs have been making similar points about the kinds of skills that are needed to succeed and the challenges, the kinds of literacies that one needs to succeed in the MOOC space. In terms of institutional capital, this is what we're talking about, certification. We know that this is an issue. The forms of certification are really important. The legitimacy of those types of forms. Is it only the elite who are going to have access to formal credit-bearing courses, and these new alternative forms are for everyone else? What is the stigma of having the wrong kind of certification? It's not just having certification, it's the value of that certification. And I think that this quote from a colleague at the University of South Africa, which has 370,000 students, makes the point that free online courses are not going to change education, not because of access or sophistication or even context, but because a qualification helps you get food on the table. And until we get verifiable accreditation right, I don't think there'll be much traction. This last notion, the last section I want to talk about, is existential inequality. And these are these kind of fuzzy, soft, touchy-feely words, which are actually the drivers of power and power relations in higher education, in education and teaching and learning, and in learning. Self-development, autonomy, freedom, dignity, respect. These are much more difficult to fix. They're not like providing lights. And these are really about agency. Who controls at the end of the day? Who has ownership? Who has control? In my part of the world, the universities have been in uproar. And they have been in uproar about a number of things. we've had our first MOOC run recently, and I think we had about 1,000 tweets. And then we've had a major student-driven agenda around transformation, which had 500,000 tweets, which were picked up all over the world. These are the issues of the day. These are absolutely burning issues. And Mbembe makes the point very powerfully when he talks about global apartheid opening up in higher education. And he says that the winners will graduate to the status of world-class universities and the losers will be relegated to the category of global bush colleges. This is very derogatory in South African terminology. The critiques of MOOCs have been extremely articulate. I'm sure you've come across some of them around money, power, condescending attitudes, different worldviews being left out, a mookery of higher education. The MOOCs, Philip Altbach, who those of you in higher education will know, is an extremely revered and reputable scholar talking about the neocolonialism of knowledge. These are not to be ignored. The dangers of the flattened coco-colonization of knowledge. What a metaphor. Extraordinary, isn't it? Very powerful. Mbembe again talks about the notion of universal knowledge as being Eurocentric knowledge, flattened and one-dimensional. And he argues for pluriversalism, a horizontal strategy of openness to dialogue amongst different epistemic traditions. These are really important issues that, to my knowledge, have not been drawn into the online higher education discussions. And I don't think that we can afford to ignore them. I think we have to look at ways of redrawing those provider and recipient relationships. And we have to shift from a broadcast model where we make available. We have to start addressing the digital production gap. So when I said it wasn't just about access, it's about contribution and participation. The read and write web for who? Who is writing? We need access to mean participation. There are very few MOOCs from Africa. I'm very proud that my university is providing MOOCs, but there are not very many. If you look at MOOCs about Africa, Manchester University, Aberdeen University, Leiden University, Emory University, who is speaking for African voices and African knowledge? These are difficult questions to ask. This is not to say that there is not anything valid coming from those places, but when you have such a one-dimensional provision, it is extremely problematic. What's more encouraging is the kind of partnerships that one is also starting to see. And this is made possible by the global affordances of online. So here we have Delft with Brazil, Duke with Tanzania, and one with Stanford, Oslo, Malawi, and China. The technology and the affordances of the online space make this all possible. There are no excuses now. The relations and the power relations are the issue, not the technological possibilities. And I think we do have to ask very hard questions about reciprocity and mutuality and obligations. Kate Bowles is an Australian writer who is not one to mince her words about difficult issues, and I think it's important that these issues are raised. Then, of course, we have the issue of language, because 80% of online content is 10 world languages. And we have some very interesting research, which I can only mention because I think it's particularly interesting. New forms of research about how the internet is used and how it's linked to place. And I would recommend following up these researchers who are tracking online regional cultures and showing how they form and shift over time. That's China, of course. different languages linked to different places. I think this is particularly important as well. Issues of online content are essential. We know that online content is dominated by the US and by developing countries. And this is true for MOOCs as well. I think it's obvious, but has to be said, that what content is found online shapes what content becomes known, especially in an age where content is found through searches online. And so which knowledge is found and used is perpetuated by the online. And it's obviously really important for knowledge formation, for learning. You know, those basics about start with one's own knowledge. Bruno, Piaget, those people. And that's why I think declarations such as the Hague Declaration, which actually is arguing for discoverability to become absolutely essential and critical, are so important. So discoverability of all knowledge becomes a requirement of equality in a digital age. Of course, one must talk about opportunities to succeed. And opportunities to succeed are made up of so many more aspects than technical and instrumental aspects. Supportive institutional environments, cultures, curricula, very complex dimensions that we need to be engaging with online. What does this mean for learning design? Well, some of us are going to be in a symposium for the next 2 days where I think we're going to be talking about this a lot. So I'm just going to touch on this very, very briefly. The absolute minimum for those concerned about openness is open licenses, legally open licenses, which make it possible to remix and adapt. So not simply non-derivative licenses, but those that say, yes, you can take my knowledge and you can do with it what you will. Otherwise, you are actually perpetuating that broadcast model. Eliciting and respect for user experiences, and then giving users the right to own their own user-generated content. It's really quite scary how often users sign away the right to their own content when they enter online environments. There's been research done on this, and it is the dominant situation. Design for diversity. There's some good research being done on principles of online inclusion and cultural inclusion. And of course, leveraging those large and massive contexts for the good of equality and diversity. And I almost left this slide off because it's such a big topic, but I couldn't leave it out because you can't not mention data and learning and analytics. It's such a promise. It's going to solve so many problems around identifying at-risk students, give us so much data. But it raises a lot of complicated issues around autonomy, privacy, issues that are effectively about forms of equality and inequity, which one must grapple with if one is in this world. So I can only just signal it for now, but I think it's very important. And so in that very broad way, I'm left with how do we grapple with this? And I actually spent a lot of time writing this question because to me it's the summary of what we need to do to grapple with these issues. And really my question is, if issues of inequality and inclusion are accepted as crucial issues and critical absences in the global online higher education landscape, how can communities of policy, research, and practice best be fostered to find shared solutions amongst a range of parties, including social scientists, development researchers, education researchers, education policy scholars and practitioners, computer scientists, and policy advocates, from different parts of the world. How can we do this? How can we make this stop being so siloed to ensure that these important issues feed one another? Thank you. As long as you don't expect me to solve all the issues that I've asked.
No, just to get this. Thank you very much for some very thought-provoking comments. Could you just go back to your last slide? So suppose you took off the term online from that sentence and thought about all that online brings to address that. We all, I mean, part of the aspiration over here with all these large-scale initiatives is to bring quality education to those who are typically underserved and quality at scale. So, would we be looking at this whole question differently?
I think the earlier point I made about the online is global is the critical difference. All of these issues pertain in local contexts, and there are certainly a huge number of problems with education in various countries. Because of the opportunities of online to be global, there are more opportunities for both, for solutions, which obviously, as I've pointed out, come with problems too. So if you're asking particularly about what's unique about the online, I think what the online does is it does provide the affordances of the global. It does bring the possibility of the world's knowledge, as long as one does this in a very nuanced way. So you are my hosts. MIT was the first to introduce open courseware. This is a fabulous thing. But it's not enough. It's like the first step. And the kinds of questions of where do you go with that? How do you actually enable different types of relationships are the kinds of issues that I'm trying to suggest and trying to ask.
So I know that if I'm out in the world, I know how to access MOOCs and things like that, but I have no idea how to evangelize that, advertise that, or have a discussion with somebody in, say, South Africa about getting them to produce content that that would be valuable to me. Or about getting them interested in content that I have produced. So this, I mean, the only thing I can think of is sort of waiting for the diffusion of knowledge to get there, which seems like a very inefficient way to go about it. Do you have good ideas for ways that we can either speed up that diffusion or make some direct links outside of our circles, very much outside of our circles in some cases?
I think, carrots are wonderful things. I think if there are quite a lot of, I mean, I'm not going to come with, but there are a lot of things you can do if you decide that that's what you want to do. So if your point is to put your stuff online and so that it's there, that's what you've decided to do. If your point is to enable collaborative relationships, you're going to set things up differently. If you're going to reward collaborative relationships, you're going to set things up differently. People will behave differently if that's what your intention is. So you have to decide that that's important. That's one solution. I mean, that's not a solution, but you have to frame what your intentions are very explicitly. And the issue of licenses, for example, pertains to that. So licenses are not an irrelevant piece of copyright. Licenses are a statement of intent. So, you know, you might give a grant and you will only give the grant if it has an open license and that it's a CC BY. You know, those kinds of conditional things can shape behavior if that's what's important for you to do. I think you have to make that decision first and then work out what you can do to enable that.
Sorry.
Hi. I found very interesting also what you said about the quality of the qualification that one might get. Like, let's assume that everybody gets access to these things, like everybody. Then if you do get a degree online, like, what will that mean? And I have friends who are downloading, they have no time of watching any of the online tutorials, but they keep downloading and downloading, and they tell me, we don't know when this is not going to be for free anymore. Like the good stuff, for example, like the MIT stuff, or whatever is considered good. And I understand this panic.
Sounds pretty strategic. You have a question.
A question and a comment. Thank you very much for what you've shared. The thing that really touched me was when you talked about the concept of a voice, and that there were institutions in the North sort of covering the issues that were contributing to the global South, and then you talked about some of the partnerships that were sort of alleviating that. But the whole notion of the individual having their own voice for their own experience just seems very powerful and sort of fundamental to what you're talking about for literature, for arts, that it should be local to the people who make it and create it. And I'm just wondering if you could think of any ways to further nurture that kind of empowerment for creating content and so forth.
That's a similar question too.
Sort of following on to what this gentleman talked about, absolutely.
I mean, I do think there are things that you can do if you decide that that's what you want to do. I mean, I'm going to repeat myself here. You know, we've got these kind of mythologies, the read-write web, but we have to make it possible for people to write to the web, and that's a set of competencies and literacies that we have to find ways of building, and we can. So, no, I don't have a checklist. It's difficult, but we have to decide that that's what we want to do, and then we can work towards doing that. Were all those hands solutions? Oh, good.
So I run a couple of MOOCs on edX in high school mathematics, and I wanted to address specifically some findings that we had regarding inequality on the academic side, where we had students coming in from very diverse academic backgrounds and trying to create something for those various students. And there were 3 points that we specifically tried to target. One was this notion of rigor, which some of the early MOOCs, like 6002X and others, boasted about how they were just as rigorous as an MIT course, and how somebody earning that certificate would have earned that just as any MIT student would have. I think that was, personally, I think that was a turn-off probably for a lot of students who felt that they may have been discouraged by that. Another is you know, the notion that if you're in a classroom with a professor, you can interact with them one-on-one, but if you're learning online, there's only one sequence through the course, and if you are stuck on some video, then you're trapped. And we try to create a course, and it's challenging to do this, and I'm happy to have a further dialogue on ways to try this. But as students go through the course, we're constantly adding new paths through lessons depending on what we're seeing. The course is constantly evolving with the students. Some early results from that is that we're seeing that the largest demographic of students who have enrolled is students who have completed high school but have no college education. And we're finding no difference between how they proceed through the course. About 20% of them get halfway through the course. It's the same among PhD students, the same among bachelor students. I mean, we keep tailoring the course specifically for those students. So I think that if there's, I think there is, I don't know that this is the solution, but specific things like this notion of academic rigor, the ivory tower, and that sort of thing, as well as creating more adaptive courses for differentiated education rather than just this linear MOOC model. I think we can really start to chip away at the disparity, at least among various academic backgrounds.
Thank you. I mean, I think what I was thinking, as I didn't answer your question, was so much of it is about learning design. So this notion that people have, someone said to me over lunch about, someone said to me earlier, you put your course online. Well, you don't put your course online. I mean, you have to design for differentiated student groupings, and that's difficult. So that's a whole new set of competencies for educators. And the idea that academics will have those competencies, well, academics have specialist knowledge in disciplinary areas. There's a shortage of that kind of, your kind of skills and knowledge is emergent and it's fantastic, but we need so much more of it everywhere. So I think what we really need to be doing is focusing our attention on learning design to enable and make possible these kinds of complex, not one-size-fits-all educational solutions. So thank you for that. Sorry, you had your one.
Yeah. So some of the early publicity around MOOCs and so forth held out the vision, of the person in some educational backwater who's extremely bright, extremely motivated, and would find a MOOC and would basically pull themselves up by the bootstraps with the aid of this new capacity. Is that actually happening? Or is that just a rumor or a hypothesis?
I think it's a lovely exceptional case. I think it does happen, and certainly the journalists get hold of it when it does happen. But I don't think it's the norm. I think the complexities of what make it possible for someone to have the resources that enable them to take advantage of those kinds of opportunities is much more complex than the arrival of this particular solution.
Any idea how rare, when you say it's rare? Okay.
No.
I feel like the obligation to just bring up libraries.
Oh, thank you.
A little row of librarians here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, libraries are shifting. We're not just repositories for knowledge. We are information literacy instructors. We are enabling patrons to empower themselves to access information. And we would love opportunities to partner and figure out ways to bridge these inequalities and put that power into information seekers. I just wanted to say that.
And thank you, librarians, for being here, because you are most definitely, I better add you to that last slide, hadn't I? You are definitely one of the key stakeholders in making this all possible, without doubt. I'm one of your advocates.
So, very quickly, the thing is, when we talk about this, any kind of technological determinism, north-south, west-east, we always talk about these initiatives and with a sense of disempowerment from the perspective of those upon whom it is done, right? As if all the problem is there. And I can say this, as a person in India, we have the East India Company, and then there's this joke now we have the West India Company, probably the Far East India Company, if you look at the progression. But where I'm getting at is there's a lot that has to be done in the receiving culture or in the culture which is affected in order to ward off or appropriately shape this. This is not a problem of the other. It is a problem of policies and structures that have to happen over here. So is there any movement towards doing things like that? And they can be very bad, as in saying anything that if there's a multinational, 51% of the ownership needs to be the local country. I mean, these things are expressed. Those walls, boundaries, filters are expressed in different ways, or through policies. Are there things being done in this realm from South Africa?
There's a lot to be done, but we can't escape money. Money is a great shaper of relationships and possibilities. And that's why I think these issues around existential inequality are so important, these notions of respect, because people, the downside of philanthropy is that people resent being grateful, but they don't always have the opportunity to not accept aid. So I think both at the personal and at the institutional level, building in collaborative relationships as a requirement become really important. And this is where funding does offer an opportunity and can shape possibilities. So some of it is about shifting a notion from a deficit model, but some of it is actually restructuring funding environments and policy environments as a result.
I think we've just about run out of time, but would you be available to do just some casual talking afterwards?
Of course.
Thank you so much, Laura. This is fantastic. Before we break, I just wanted to just outline the rest of the afternoon's schedule, because we will have another event in here at 4 o'clock. There'll be a panel on online learning that will actually talk about sort of some of the threads that have been introduced here will be picked up in the next panel. I also want to make a few announcements because this is the last xTalks of the season, and I have some thanks I want to express to people who really helped the xTalks thrive this year with their hard work and great advice. So I would like to just thank Vijay Kumar for all his fantastic support and valued inspiration as the thought leader for xTalks. Thank you, Vijay. It's been great. I'm also very grateful to two colleague scholars, Claudia Urea and Joseph Searing, whose deep discipline knowledge has helped to create events of real value to our community. So thank you so much, Claudia and Joseph, for what you've done this year. Thank you. And lastly, I have a group of ODL colleagues, Sarah Jane Vaughn, Gracie Dornius, Jennifer Amaya, Judy Leonard, who have provided logistical, organizational, promotional, artistic, and administrative support who've helped to make these things happen. And I just want to express thanks to them as well. So thank you.